And it's Monday morning, and I'm so glad to be back here after a long weekend of just putting my feet up. I was out over the weekend. I should just quickly note this. And I was just doing some driving around on some of the side streets in Twin Falls. And I happened to see that there were a great many yard sales going on. Here's the thing, though. The people who have the most junk at yard sales, and really most of it is, how many times have you gone up to somebody's house and they've got all their used clothing there? How many times have you found a Picasso sitting along the side? You may hear those stories now and then, but nobody actually knows anyone that's ever happened to. So the people who I would least want to buy from have the biggest displays at these yard sales. Funny how that works. It's the same thing when you go to Halloween or at Christmas. The people who probably can least afford it have the most gaudy displays outside with all of the inflatables and the junk and lots of plastic. And you ask yourself, how do they afford it? 45, Bill Colley with you this morning. It is coming up on 8 minutes after 8 o'clock, and I'd like to say, hey, thank you for joining us today. And, of course, a couple of hours away, we'll be moving into Rush Limbaugh, but in the meantime, I've got a lot on the agenda. In a few minutes, I'm going to be joined by a fellow who's talking about an event coming up. If you'd like to learn how to ride a motorcycle, he's going to offer you some details on what is called the boot camp for training. And obviously, it's not as easy as it looks. I mean, you've got to take some safety precautions, too, as well. That's on the way. Randy Staple is in this hour. Randy's going to talk a little bit about some issues related to state government. And speaking of that, that's my jumping off point today. Now, I don't often read the local newspaper. I have found that the price of it for 3 local stories on a Sunday is perhaps a little steep. $2 and some change generally, and then you've got a couple of stories on the front page and maybe one other story that's worthwhile taking a look at. But when I do buy it, I tend to take a look at the Sunday, what are called opinion pages, because of course the people who work at this newspaper, the Times News I guess it's called, are so, how shall we put it, out of touch with what most people in this area actually believe. And yet, it doesn't matter to them. The fact that their circulation numbers continue to just plummet, and I'm aware of what's going on in the newspaper industry. I'm not completely blind. I was working with consultants for many years, and I was party to all of the research going on. And this is not something that is just happening in one place and not anywhere else. It's happening everywhere around the country, and most people now, especially people who get political news, are either getting it directly from the internet or they're getting it from talk radio. They're not even paying any attention to these newspapers. But here's something that I was looking at. Report card time for Magic Valley lawmakers. And then there's a photograph here of the governor giving his State of the State address. And it mentions at one point, apparently the newspaper did a survey with several of your local state legislators asking them to grade their legislative performance or the overall performance of the legislature. Some people didn't respond. And near the end of this editorial, take a listen to this. You're being threatened by a guy who's got a one-horse newspaper that might have a circulation now of 10 or 12,000? And he writes, unfortunately, a handful of area lawmakers chose not to turn in their final exams, despite some nagging from us. Senator Lee Hyder and House Speaker Scott Bedke missed a chance to explain their performance to you, the voters. And then get this line. We expect you'll grade them accordingly. So, you have 2 legislators who are going to sail to their next re-elections being threatened by this rag. And for all of the 16 people who actually decided to get through the end of this editorial, I'm sure you sat there and your face was beet red because they did not reply when it came to grading their legislative performance. And then the steam started to come out of your ears, and you started to huff and puff and said, I'll get them and their little dog too on election day. Do you realize the self-importance that it takes to publish something like this on a weekly basis? And the delusional aspects of it, that they actually believe in the long run that they have some sort of influence. Look, I'm in the talk radio business, and I'm going to tell you right now, there's an old joke that Joey Reynolds, who was one of my talk radio mentors when I first got into talk radio on a full-time basis about a dozen years ago, told me one time, and he said, we think we have a lot of influence. A lot of people may be tuning in, but what Joey said to me, he said, if we had so much influence, he said, how come Rush Limbaugh did not stop Bill Clinton from being elected twice? And he also didn't stop Barack Obama from being elected twice. So there you go. I mean, all of this notion that those of us in media actually have some sort of outsized influence on the process, you've got to learn to live within your own head. And that means recognizing that it's not, 16 feet wide and that it's as normal as everybody else's head. And we've got to realize that those egos really don't match our abilities. We have a caller with us. It's 46 right now, 12 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and you're up next. You're on the air.
Hey, Bill, what do you call delusional? I mean, delusional is just listening to somebody create a fictitious enemy. It's either the media or it's either Sharia law, or, it's always creating this phantom nemesis that's gonna destroy the American population. There's younger people coming up that just don't subscribe to that. And so delusional, oh yeah, laugh. I'm telling you.
Yes, you're very profound today.
No, it's not that I'm being profound. It's just the truth.
That's very true. You're not being profound.
600,000 followers that I have, and all of them are younger. All of them, wow. They range from the age of 20 all the way to 45.
Wow, how'd you pull that off?
That's more than you got. Thank you.
600,000? Talk about delusional. 8:13 now, and you can reach our program by dialing up 736-0300. That would be 736-0300. Just speaking of steam coming out of somebody's ears, you can just see that guy driving down the road in the morning, and, the huffing and puffing and... I'll tell you what, we've got people out there who just have these delusions of grandeur, and they're living amongst us, and they just don't seem to be able to. 600,000 followers of what? News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. The newspaper business is circling the drain. Let's make that clear. And the legislators know this as well. They do their own surveys. I remember one time talking to a friend who got a job working in a state legislative office, back east somewhere in the Appalachians. And he said, we actually have people, we assign people to do those polls every now and then to find out where people are getting their information from. And he said by the late 1990s, it was already in free fall for the newspaper business. I remember bringing this up on a talk show about 10 years ago, and I mentioned that the local newspaper, and I had a friend, he was printing what was called the local penny saver. He was in a neighboring county, and that's one of those publications where people have most of the ads. It's just almost exclusively ads, and a lot of news notices about upcoming events, Knights of Columbus breakfasts or Masonic Lodge dinners, that type of thing. And the newspaper in that aspect, in that small town, is a very important tool, if you will. You can find things that you might not find somewhere else, and so you have it in that sense for that reason. But he was tracking, because he was in competition with these big newspapers, these dailies especially, he was tracking their numbers, and he was telling me at the time that some of these big newspapers are losing 10 to 15,000 subscribers a year. These were papers that had at one time in excess, of well over 100,000 people. And I brought this up on a radio talk show one day, and I can remember someone at the time saying to me, you're just being mean to the newspaper. First of all, I don't understand why you even defend an inanimate object. It's not like a newspaper gets its feelings hurt. And even if it did, who cares? But we brought it up on the air, and I said to the caller, I said, you know what? That newspaper will not be publishing in another decade. And about 3 years ago, that very newspaper, it's almost not publishing. It went from being 7 days a week now to just Tuesdays and Sundays. And they have an online presence, and they did this because they had this huge staff of reporters. And in the middle of the 1990s, they'd built this brand new press room that was enormous. It doubled the size of the newspaper's building. And then they found they had no need for it after they spent all of this money. And unfortunately, along came Craigslist and the internet, and the newspapers had their lunch eaten by these people. So now this big city newspaper is down to maybe 8 people actually reporting on some news stories, and it's all online. And so they had to set up a paywall online because everyone was reading the headlines and they weren't getting any money from ad revenue. And even with a paywall, they're still not making a go of it. When I get up in the morning, one of the first things I do take a look at the AP wire, which just parrots what the remaining newspapers in Idaho have to say, the big stories from each. And I also take a look at the website, like the Real Clear Politics website. I'll take a look at that because it's amazing. I see occasionally a link to an old line newspaper's website. But for the most part, the rundown that they have, and it's very balanced. You're getting what they'll do is they'll post liberal response, conservative response, liberal, conservative, all the way down the page. And they'll have a couple of dozen of these posts in the course of a day. And you can go through those. But I'm seeing names, and I don't know what these publications even are any longer. There is a Daily Caller, Daily Beast, Daily Signal, Daily Harumph. I mean, you've got all of these new publications out there, but those are what are attracting an audience. And they've got a business model that is going to succeed. And just a note for all of these Republicans, because that is what the point here is with this newspaper. It's to try to excoriate the Republicans in state legislative offices in Idaho. Just a note, you shouldn't be afraid of this, and I know you're not. When you see this, you probably laugh just as much as everyone else who actually took the time to read it is laughing. There's also a mention in here about how these terrible, rotten people did not finish that legislation on the child support bill and may have to go back for an additional special session. Except nobody at the newspaper ever tells you what these bills are going to cost. They ignore certain things that they don't want you to know, as if it's not important. You've got to ask yourself, is their understanding of economics that infantile in the newspaper industry that they just don't have an ability to comprehend these things? Because that's obviously what it seems like to a great many of us. It's 19 minutes after 8 o'clock. I've got a guest coming up talking about a much happier note. Going to be talking with us about an event coming up. In fact, if you'd like to learn how to ride a motorcycle, there's a crash course. No, maybe that's not quite the word, is it? No, we will not. We will strike that one from our vocabulary. We'll try to come up with something else. 46 right now. It's 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX. We have a guest joining us in the studio, and he's talking about something I think that is very critical, and a lot of people, especially this time of year, like to get out and actually feel that wind in their hair. And one way a lot of people do that when they talk about recreation, or some people just love to do it. It's even more than recreation. It's a lifestyle choice. And that is biking. We're not talking about the Schwinn you may have had when you were a kid. We're talking about something that might be a little more expensive. Dave Fisher is joining us from Snake Harley-Davidson. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I was going to say a little more expensive when you buy a Harley-Davidson, and it's a little more powerful than a bicycle you had when you were 15 years old, isn't it?
That's true. That's true. The Harleys, they're pretty unique and pretty nice to have. So
most famous motorcycle in the world, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, Harley-Davidson is the number one motorcycle in the world. So.
It's what everyone covets. Even all around the world, people, when they talk motorcycles, they talk Harley-Davidson.
Yes, Harley-Davidson's very, very popular.
A lot of people, when they're first learning to ride, and this is you're talking with us a little bit about some details about an event coming up. When they're first learning to ride, it may look easy when you see someone out on the road, but there's a lot you need to learn. And if you're going to do it, you've got to learn it the right way. And this is what the whole idea of what you're doing is something called a boot camp coming up, right?
Yeah, we're doing a Harley-Davidson boot camp, and basically it's a no-pressure introduction to the basics of owning and riding a Harley-Davidson.
And a Harley-Davidson, just sometimes because of the size. I mean, I've seen some of these people on some of these Japanese bikes, which are really just glorified bicycles with an engine on them. The Harley itself, because of its size, it's bigger, it's going to have perhaps more power, it might obviously weigh more. There are going to be some things you need to know that you wouldn't necessarily need to know on a smaller bike.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn as far as owning and operating one of these motorcycles. So.
I was going to say, people when they see you sometimes on the street, you drove a bike in this morning. When they see you on the street, I'm sure they have a lot of questions. And the idea is you're going to get them all answered too if you attend the actual event.
Yeah, if you attend the boot camp, you're going to learn so much about Harleys as far as the motorcycles, how many models, and from sizes small to big, price range from your lowest price range to your highest price range, and weight, power. There's a lot to learn about them, and we're going to show you.
When's that coming up?
That's this Wednesday, April 22nd, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. here at Snake Harley-Davidson at 2404 Addison Avenue East here in Twin Falls.
And I was going to say, if people are coming, should they register in advance or at least give you a heads up?
Yeah, you want to RSVP. You can go to our website at snakehd.com, go to Facebook, or you can even call the store and we'll be more than happy to log you in there.
I was going to say, what's the number at the store for people who might? We'll give them a minute to grab a pen or pencil, and maybe we'll have to mention it again a second time. But what's the telephone number?
The telephone number is 734-8400.
Our guest is Dave Fisher. He's joining us from Snake Harley-Davidson. 47 in our studios, coming up on 27 minutes after 8 o'clock. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. For the people, again, who'd like to, you know how this is at home. You're racing to find that pencil or pen, and so just repeat the number one more time.
Yeah, it's 208-734-8400.
What do you find that you really enjoy about the experience of being on a bike?
Just being on the open road. When you're in a car cruising down the road, you really don't notice a lot of things on the side of the road, up in the trees around and stuff. And so being out on the open road on a Harley, you tend to notice more and tend to enjoy the environment around you a little bit more than what you do in a car. So
I think the only thing I might find comparable to it, I remember when I was a kid, and when I was very young, I think 6 or 7 years old, I was on a sled for the first time in winter. And so, I'd be out snowmobiling and I'd get that experience. But you're dressed up on a cold day and, you're dressed up like in a cocoon practically. But when one of my best friends came home on leave from the Army when we were 18 years old, and first thing he did, he went out and he bought himself a bike. And he took me out for a ride. And on a summer's day, the experience of doing that and just racing along, and we weren't racing that fast. Speed limit 55 probably. It's an entirely different experience than being on a sled.
Yeah, it is. It's having that wind in your hair and just kicking back and enjoying the warmth of the sun.
There's some liberty in that.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is.
And plus, you get away from all your concerns at home for maybe a few hours too.
Yeah, it does open up your mind and allow you to think and relieve anything that's been on your mind all week long. So
yeah, good stress management. So once again, it's Wednesday night.
Yeah, it's Wednesday night, April 22nd, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. There at Snake Harley-Davidson on Addison Avenue East. And like I said, you can RSVP at our website at snakehd.com. You go on our Facebook page or call the store at 208-734-8400 and we'll get you logged in.
This is a great way to get people interested in what is obviously a wonderful sport, recreation, whatever you'd like to call it.
Yeah, it's a great deal, and I think a lot of people kick back and wonder what it's going to be like if they ever got out there and got on that bike, and when you do, you'll be more than happy. You wish you did it earlier. It's
the dream, I think, of most men.
Yep.
All right, Dave, thank you for coming by today.
Thanks for having us.
Dave Fisher joining us from Snake Harley-Davidson this morning. We're coming up on 8:30, 47 at our studios. This is Top Story. Randy Staples is going to be joining us in just a few minutes from the Idaho Weekly Briefing, talking about that potential special legislative session coming up in Boise. More details ahead on that in just a few minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX. We talk a little bit about learning to drive various machinery that you may not see. Driving a car, you learn that at 16 or so, and depending on what state you grew up in, you learned how to do that, and you've been doing it for 30 years, and you think you've got it nailed. But sometimes when it comes to, I was watching somebody the other day, in fact, with a large truck backing it up in our parking lot, and I turned to Penny Main, one of our coworkers, and I said to Penny, I said, I could never do that. I just don't have the eyesight for it. Secondly, even if I did, I think I'd be chewing my fingernails. But there are people who will teach you how to drive various vehicles. In fact, our good friends at Western States Bus Services are hiring part-time bus drivers right now, split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. This is a great, I should point out, second income for a family, and it will not eat up your entire day, especially if you are working on a farm and you've got one of the spouses looking for that little extra money. We'll still be back in the middle of the day to help out with anything that you have going on. So just check that out if you're looking for that additional income. Also, coming up on Wednesday, we'll be joined by one of the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine between 8:30 and 9 o'clock every Wednesday morning, and we give you an opportunity to check in. And as I said last week, you're not going to be able to get a lot of free medical advice, or at least someone pointing you in the right direction when it comes to a concern you may have for yourself or maybe a family member, a neighbor, a friend. You have that opportunity, and we'll be discussing some of those medical issues this Wednesday morning, as we do every Wednesday. You can tune in at 8:30 a.m. for Better Health, brought to you by Tripp Family Medicine in Twin Falls. It's across from the post office, their office, across from the main post office on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. I saw something over the weekend, and it just caught my attention fleetingly, and I sat down to read this story, and the more I read it, the more I thought this really points to some of the cultural rot in the United States. Anybody ever hear of Valdosta State? I believe that's in California. A military veteran was detained but not charged by Valdosta State University police after she approached a group of protesters on campus who were walking on an American flag, and she took it from them. Yeah, she just snatched it up. There's a photograph here in the story from the Valdosta Daily Times. And you actually see somebody, the photographer, I guess they didn't want to identify the ne'er-do-wells involved. You only see somebody from the knees down walking across this flag, but the flag had a pole on it. They'd thrown it down on the ground. Now, this veteran happened to be on campus, and somebody told her what was going on, and she decided to go defend the flag. She was arrested, of course. Michelle Manhart. She said she was taken into custody by campus police officers who then returned the flag to the demonstrators. She then admitted to the Valdosta Daily Times that she resisted arrest after seeing the flag being returned. And the questions are now being raised, why would they have given the flag back to the demonstrators? Because the demonstrators and this woman were both yanking it back and forth, and no one actually said, "That's my flag." She was given a criminal trespass warning, which effectively bans her from any university activity, including graduation and football games, said Andy Clark, Vice President for Enrollment, Marketing, and Communications. Now, the demonstrators declined to identify their group to a newspaper reporter or speak to the reporter about their cause. One member, though, of the group was overheard telling a VSU student that putting the American flag on the ground and walking on it was a, quote, symbol of our protest. When a slave understands his situation and understands he doesn't want to be in slavery, he does not respect or revere anything his slave master has put in front of him, unquote. When I was in college, I happened to be involved in a lot of activities that might have been called radical. But if anybody had suggested this idea to me, I would have balked at it. And I have to admit, when I was a college student, I was not a conservative. I was far more to the other side, my head getting filled every day by all of these ideas from professors. Once I left, it was funny how quickly I got into the real world and realized none of what they told me is applicable here. In fact, if you were at your workplace and all of a sudden you decided on your lunch hour to throw the flag down and start walking on it, they'll be looking for reasons to fire you. Let's be honest about that. And I've said it before, this type of behavior will not land you a job in most instances unless you'd like to go to Chicago and become a community organizer. Speaking of some of these outlandish ideas, Robert Knight, writing at the Washington Times, "The Insanity Around Us. Did someone explode a crazy bomb over America?" He says, polls continue to assert that a majority of Americans now think that weddings lacking a bride or a groom are identical to vows between a man and a woman. In Washington, the administration still pretends there is no particular religious tie-in to the systematic killing of Christians in the Middle East and Africa. In drought-stricken California, the governor is rationing water while pouring billions of gallons into the sea so as not to disturb a tiny fish, the Delta smelt. In Oregon, he writes, which is vying with California for Looney Estate, an incident at a state university provides a wonderful snapshot of the deranged liberal war on freedom of speech. During an election campaign for the Students' Association at the University of Oregon, Ellie Mallon, a vice presidential candidate for the Ducks First Party, filed a grievance on April 3rd against the rival We Are Oregon campaign. The latter shockingly held its kickoff event in a building with no gender-inclusive bathrooms. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know that I have a lot of hope for the future. Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing joining us in just a moment on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. At this time on Monday mornings, we are joined on Top Story by a very special guest who breaks down a great many issues going on in the state of Idaho for us. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. And our guest for the next 15 minutes or so, Randy Staples from the Idaho Weekly Briefing. First of all, welcome back.
Good to be back.
There was a right up near the top of the briefing when I was looking at it earlier this morning. You had referenced the fact, and there's a lot of discussion about this, about a potential special session, legislative session on the way, because there may still be some work ahead on a child support bill, which ended up being somewhat controversial. I know there were some people who did not support it because they felt that it could impinge eventually on sovereignty because we're dealing with people who may flee to other countries versus pay child support. But I saw something in the Times News over the weekend where Jim Patrick had said there was also a cost factor in this too as well that he thought needed to be, and he's not opposed to going back, but that he thought that we also needed to talk a little bit about some costs that may be involved. What's your take on all of that?
Well, there are of course costs that were I had not seen what Representative Patrick had to say. Was he referring to the cost of the special session itself, or the cost of the child support bill?
I think he was actually talking about the bill, saying that there could be millions and millions of dollars tied to it, and that he was concerned that we have to really make sure we can pay for all of that.
Well, the one argument that sometimes comes up when federal funds are involved is what would happen if the federal funds went away, and would the state then be kind of on the hook for some of that? The situation in this case is a little bit different in a way, in that if the legislature doesn't act, the federal funds do go away, and the state is not at this point in a position to pick up the tab at all. That's simply money that would not be coming in, that the state would not be spending at all. I suppose it could choose to at the next regular session, but that's not really in the plan at all at this point. What we're mainly talking about is federal funds, and more than that, which I'll get to in just a second. Federal funds that are not coming in. The other part of it is that passing the bill would allow the state to participate in a system. It's kind of like the law enforcement cooperation system that various law enforcement agencies have with each other, or that the people in the states have with the feds and so on. That they can exchange information. They will recognize each other's efforts to pursue crimes or things like that. In this case, it's a matter of states and a good number of foreign countries that will recognize each other's attempts to collect child support. And if the bill is not passed, then Idaho is kind of out of that system.
The governor seems to support the bill, but we've talked before about how, despite the fact that we've got Republicans under the same political tent with him, does not necessarily mean there's always agreement.
Oh no, it's there's some real question about whether, or there appears to have been some real question about whether, if the special session is called, the Idaho House will necessarily pass the bill. The bill passed in the Idaho Senate by a unanimous vote. Every senator voted for it, although one later recanted, and it could be possible that one or two others might. But the Senate seemed to be overwhelmingly in support. What might happen in the House, nobody knows with absolute certainty. Now you can do vote counting. You can ask the members of the House what would they do if it comes before them, and I imagine that a good deal of that's been going on. And the governor, understandably, would not want to call the legislators back into session if he didn't feel that there was a good chance that the bill would pass. That's kind of a standard that governors often use. That when a specific issue like this comes up, they want to know that if they go to the expense and trouble and a little bit of political risk as well of calling them back into a special session, they want to know that there's at least a good reasonable chance that this will get done. But the governor's position, I think, is fairly clear in favor of the bill. Not so much because of what he has said personally, which has not been really strong in its point of view, but more from what the Department of Health and Welfare, which reports directly to him, has had to say, and it was very blunt. When the legislature when the House Judiciary Committee rather tabled the bill, the Department of Health and Welfare issued a press release that was absolutely remarkable. I've not seen anything quite like it from any state agency in the past. That said very specifically, here are the effects that tabling this bill will have, and they could be devastating for a lot of families that are reliant on collecting child support from around the country and around the world.
In fact, I saw a story on the AP Wire this morning related to that, where they're saying that, look, if we don't have it done within a couple of months, we're going to have a crisis on our hands. And I think that from what I understand, a lot of the people who were opposed not because they'd like to see the child support collected for obvious reasons, but there is some concern that language in the bill might need to be clarified on that sovereignty issue, which obviously has become in the western states clearly a much bigger issue in the last half dozen years than probably any time in the history of this country since its founding.
Well, certainly, I would say since the Civil War, it's become a very large issue, and it's in some ways kind of an odd thing that happened with this bill, because there are a lot of bills and there are a lot of state rules which the legislature acts on very directly, as we've talked about before during each session, that relate to signing on to national packages or national changes of activities. Everything from signing on to a national electrical code and building plans to environmental rules, to all sorts of other things. Legislature routinely does a lot of these sorts of things. They do a bunch of them as part of the normal run of business in just about every legislative session. It's not an unusual kind of thing at all to sign on to various national packages, but in the environment that there is in the Idaho legislature, this one just seemed to catch some attention, and as a result, it's provided a major hang-up point. If 60 days from now, well, somewhat less than that, if within the next couple of months, the state doesn't act, it could very well be shut out of child support collection outside of the state, other than whatever individual single parents and people like that can manage to do privately. It could have a real major problem for a lot of those people.
8:52 right now at Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 48 at our studios. Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing joining me this morning. Bill Colley, of course, the host of the show, if you're just tuning in. The couple of other things, one thing that really caught my eye, you had some quotes from various legislators following the session, and you said, of course, it was probably a much more productive session than we've seen in a number of years, but some of the quotes are quite humorous, and one of them that caught my attention was the argument over an inspector general where one of the legislators said, I believe we already have 105 of them here. In other words, that's us. Why do we need
to the legislators? Yes.
Why do we need this role? What?
Yes, he was trying to indicate, I think, that we have a pretty good review system with legislators right here, and it is part of their job to review what the state agencies do, what is done under the terms of the rules of the laws that they pass, and so on. That is part of their job, but it's not really the same thing as someone that in a professional way, in a systematic way, in a full-time way, year-round, takes a serious look at whether things are being done properly, the money is being spent properly, whether somebody might be either not doing their job properly or even doing something like embezzling or something like that. There is a legislative performance office that does a little bit of that, but it has kind of a limited role. They're not really inspector generals in the sense that an inspector general in a lot of states are. That they really can't do that because they have a limited amount of time, and it's not a slam at legislators who do try to do some oversight to say that they can't really fulfill that role because that's not really what they're there for.
In a lot of states, you have controllers and auditors who do, in some respects, handle some of those duties. But my concern would be an inspector general. If you hire someone and you'd like to hire someone to be in that role objectively, still they're going to be funded by legislators, and it would be very difficult for someone to have that independence.
That's true. Although it's kind of interesting that the Legislative Performance Office, the Office of Performance Evaluations that Idaho does have, is directly under control of a legislative committee, but it has actually managed to maintain some real independence over the last few years. They periodically deliver reports to the legislators that can't come as terribly welcome news to them. And when you see that they're delivering reports that may make some of the legislators uncomfortable because they run counter to some of the presumptions that the legislators have, you kind of get the sense that they do have a certain amount of independence, but it's always there's always a certain tension there.
We got about 2.5 minutes to go. Quickly, the website address for people who would like to check out Idaho Weekly Briefing
is www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
We've been subject to a lot of stories lately about how dry it has been in the western regions of the country. You have some details there today about efforts along with the 4 states in this region, along with Canada, to finish something, a Columbia River Treaty that could help at least with some water resources throughout the Northwest.
That's right. It's an option that the U.S. and Canada have. It's an option that the Obama administration could pick up. It hasn't gone but so far down that road up to this point. It's not obliged to. It could decide not to. I think that it probably will pursue a treaty like that. But what happened last week was that the congressional delegation from the Northwest, and that was all of the members of Congress from Idaho, from Oregon, from Washington, all of them urged the administration to undertake that treaty and make that agreement with Canada.
In fact, when you have people like Mike Crapo and Patty Murray, I guess, in agreement, I guess we could say it's likely a good deal.
There's likely to be pretty broad agreement on it on that sense. That's certainly true.
Very quickly, any predictions on this special session? What do you see coming up?
I think the odds of the special session happening are probably a little better than even because the headlines are going to continue on the whole child support issue. But They may not. It's. I think there is a very good chance that we'll get a definitive answer this week or maybe very early next week. They can't wait too much longer on this.
I was going to say it seems that legislators themselves believe it's going to happen, and it doesn't seem to be there are really any objections to that.
There would be objections, of course, from the people who would want to vote against the bill, because if there's no special session, then they get the status quo. But I think there's a pretty fair chance that will happen. And then the question would come up as well: is anything else added? In Idaho, the governor gets to decide what the agenda is going to be for a special session, decide what they can and cannot consider. And so the next question would be: is there anything else that he might want to throw onto their agenda? And I suppose that question would come up as well.
It'll give us more to talk about next week.
It probably will.
Randy, thank you much for your time this morning, and take care, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Randy Stable is joining us this morning from Idaho Weekly Briefing on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story with Bill Colley. One more hour of the program still ahead. Hey, if I get a chance, I want to share some audio with you from a story out of Florida. Who's responsible for a woman who has 15 children from multiple fathers? Details after news. Now, you understand it's going to be the nicest day today, likely for the next week. We're looking for a high temperature of 75, plenty of sunshine, and we're at 50 right now. So we're seeing a rather gradual warm-up this morning on our way, and I'm sure within the next hour or so we'll just see that temperature jump up into the 60s as we get a little bit more sunshine pouring over the area. Thank you for joining me. Hour number 2 of our program today. As we closed the show on Friday, I got a paddling from a veteran, from a military veteran, because I was talking about the people who get checks from the government. And the government right now, more than 50% of all Americans are getting a check one way or another from the federal government. It can be aid to dependent children, it can be Social Security, it can be the money that's being paid for your health care. The poor get a program for that. Any number of different things. And I said, ultimately, you can all just call it welfare. You can use whatever semantics that you want. And I got a call from a disabled veteran. And the disabled veteran was telling me, he said, look, I don't consider what I'm getting welfare. And as I sat there and listened to him, I said, you know what? He is right. There is a distinction here we need to make. If you signed on that dotted line and you said that you were going to, let me just move my microphone here. It sounds like my knee's moving, creaking like a rusty spring. But if you served your country, and doesn't necessarily mean even in the military, a police officer, sheriff's deputy, prison guard, EMT, firefighter, and you have some injuries from what you did in the line of duty in that service to other people, we owe you a debt. So that's just part of your pay for what you've done. And if you've given a limb or you've come back with some other issue, I think that we really need to be attuned to that. And I think we need to also be attuned to this situation. If you lose someone, in fact, in service, we have to definitely take care of the survivors. I think everyone would agree with that. I don't see anyone out there who would say no. Maybe if Ayn Rand were still alive, she'd be saying, no, let's not do that, that the market will take care of all of this and it will correct itself. Or that we should have perhaps our churches get involved. The problem is, of course, government is pushing the churches out of the way and taking over all of these responsibilities anyway. So the man made a great point. But I still hold to the rest of what I was saying. If you are not in that group and you are getting a check, you can try to sugarcoat it and present it any way you like it. But if you're out there and you're on one of these programs, poverty programs, whatever else, or if you're receiving Social Security after working for 50 years or 40 years, let's be honest, most people are going to get back, because of the lifespan, the average lifespan now, get back more than they put in. And you can call it whatever you like to make yourself feel better. It is still a transfer payment. Some of these, the word is egregious. Some of these are so egregious, when you hear about them, they literally just pull you up out of your seat. And this is a story from a TV station in Florida. You may have already seen a clip from this, perhaps, because it's gotten a lot of attention over the last several days. I'm going to share it with you in just a moment. We're coming up on 10 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And I'd like you to take a listen to this for a moment. This is a story from a Florida television station about a woman. She's got 15 kids. I saw her in the actual video portion of this, and she can't even be 40 years old. She's got 15 kids from multiple fathers. Take a listen to what she's saying here, especially at the tail end of this clip. And it'll really just, if you don't feel that we've gotten completely out of control with the welfare state in this country, this might be what puts you over the edge. Somebody needs to pay. Somebody needs to be held accountable. Somebody needs to pay. So the boyfriend got in trouble with the law, and he's off in prison, so she has no income. Apparently, whatever they're paying him for the license plates that he stamps out, is just going to cover his meals and other expenses, and the cost of housing him, which is probably already exorbitant. Tens of thousands of dollars a year it costs every year to house each prisoner, in whether it be just a jail or whether it be in a prison is just out of this world too as well. So here's this woman, because she can't keep her pants on, she's got 15 kids. Now, we only know that 10 of them came from one man who is apparently a loser because he's already in prison, probably been there several other times. I would bet if you delved into this story. And then of the other 5, we don't know if it was just one father or it could have been 5 fathers, but she's got 15 children. And she believes that you and I, that we are responsible for caring for all of these kids because she cannot keep her pants on. And this is the mindset of a great many Americans today. They believe that we simply owe it to them. And I'm sorry that the kids are hungry, but as you heard, social services already gave them furniture, helped with rent, helped with heat, helped with all of these other programs. I mean, they're breeding faster than rabbits, and they somehow expect that we're responsible. Our telephone number, 736-0300. You're up next. You're on the air on Top Story with Bill Colley.
Well, this is what we call liberalism at its best. If she's not been held accountable for anything, whatever she's done, I've heard story after story about people standing in line at welfare deals while the person behind them saying, well, I got to have another kid so I can get more money.
Yeah.
If you're on a welfare system, you should get penalized for having another kid. Not rewarded, penalized. I mean, these guys have no problem aborting their kids, but they also have no problem having a bunch of them and expecting everybody else to take care of them. So your answer to your question is, who is ultimately responsible? She is.
Yes.
She's the mother. She had them. She's responsible for them. I'm not a rich man. I only had 2 kids, and I could barely afford those. And I only had 2 because of that.
You are responsible. I thank you much for the call. And you're next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I got an issue about the you call them Social Security welfare. And I understand what you're saying is because of our lifespan, we're living longer, we're getting back probably more than we put in. But one premise you're forgetting, had the federal government not stole that money from us and spend it where it wasn't supposed to be spent, we could have invested it in something, drawing a miserable 5% interest.
It's a tax.
And had 5 times the money that they're giving us.
So what would you call it? I mean, we tax people, we turn around and we give money back to other people. What do you call it?
I would call it a contract that the government made with
it's
us
a tax.
by taking, and they
it's
took
the
our
only
money.
way.
They
it's a
took
tax.
Our money. They take our money, and we could not. It was something we had to do.
I know it makes people feel bad to think that it's not welfare, not for me. But if you're getting back far more than you ever paid in, which most people end up doing, if you tax money from people and you take money from them, then the government turns around and issues checks. One program is called Medicare, right? Or Medicaid. One program is called Social Security. Another program is called Aid to Dependent Children. Another is called... You realize, folks, in the long run, you can call it whatever you want if it makes you feel better. We're taking money from one group of people and we're giving it to another group. Call it whatever you like, blue, green, or purple. It's still a color, right? You got to look at it that way. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and what's on your mind?
Yeah, 2 callers ago, the subject of who is ultimately responsible came up, and the gentleman stated that that woman was. I disagree with that in the sense that we're responsible as a society for allowing the politicians that we elected to set up the very system that enables this to happen. It's our responsibility.
Oh, there's going to be people who have 15 kids with different men, no matter how you slice it. I don't care who's in charge.
Exactly. But in the same respect, when the incentive is there, if you have never seen it, there's a documentary. It's on Netflix streaming called Pruitt Igoe. It's about the housing projects in East St. Louis. One of the most eye-opening documentaries I've ever seen. But we set up a system that incentivizes doing the very thing that woman is doing with no repercussions whatsoever. Plus, as a moral society, well, we've lost our moral footing. Normally, there would have been people that would have stepped in a long time ago and said, hey, sister, you're not doing what's right for your kids, and that's not doing right by God.
Well, and again, there's not a lot of God out there. I thank you for the call. Number 2, he brings up a point that I wanted to get to a couple of minutes ago before I was taking some of the telephone calls. Bob Beckel, who's one of the hosts, I guess is he back yet? He had a back surgery done, so he's been off air for quite a couple of months now, at least last I looked. He is one of the hosts of The Five at Fox. He's primarily, when the regulars are in, he is the only liberal on the program. The other 4 are conservative. Beckel has said, and even coming from a liberal, used to work for Walter Mondale and Jimmy Carter, he said that this program called Aid to Dependent Children is completely out of control. He said liberals would say, well, this will make, this is the right thing to do, this makes us feel good, so let's go out and create this program. But it encouraged people, because if a husband was in the house, you couldn't get aid to dependent children the way the law was written. It's still in effect 30, 40 years later. So the husband, he comes by, or a boyfriend, knocks the woman up, and then he leaves again. Because the only way she gets more money from the government is if there's no guy in the house. So the last caller really nailed it in that sense. What we've done is we've created a system where it is more profitable for these women to go out and have a lot of children, whether it be with just one man or dozens of men, and not have those men living in the house with them. So we created a system to help break down the American family and to create these rather ridiculous situations like this woman has in Florida. Beckel even admits to that. And he said liberals made a lot of serious mistakes over the last 50 years with a lot of these programs. They didn't sit down. Wow, can you imagine that? Some leftist didn't sit down and think about what the consequences were going to be to their actions. Now there's a shocker. We've been telling you that on talk radio for how long? 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you. Look, more of your telephone calls coming up too as well. In the meantime, we've got to listen to some messages from some of our fine sponsors. It's 49 at our studios. As I say, 9:20 this morning, and we'll have, well, almost another 40 minutes of the program still ahead. Hope you can stick around. We were talking in the last segment of the program about liberalism and some of the just wickedly difficult problems it has created in this country, because everyone said it wanted to make me feel better, and I got a warm feeling all over when we passed the law. Of course, you didn't think how you were going to pay for it. Who was it? I've forgotten now. I think it was one of the old Johnson acolytes. I saw him in a documentary some years ago. Documentary about was on PBS about Johnson and Nixon, who said, yeah, we passed a lot of these laws, but we never asked ourselves how we were going to pay for them. Maybe you should have. 9:24, Bill Colley with you. 50 at our studios on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have another caller with us. You're up next.
You know, this whole environment is so insane. The other day, I don't know if you noticed, and he was on Hannity, a black gentleman who played college football was walking a white elderly lady out to her car because there was just a slew of black, young people out there just have nothing to do. So he went out there to take her to her car, and for some reason he was attacked and hit, and then he hit back, and then they all attacked him, and he was black and they were black, and they attacked their own brother, and he had him up against the wall. Now, he was apparently a tough guy because he came out of it all right, but they were like animals. And you see, they all had phones and they were recording it, but they obviously they don't have a job. It's just like, in Ferguson, Missouri, after a hard day of rioting or a hard night of rioting, what do you do that night? You go to bed in the morning and you sleep in, and then you go back to work, rioting?
Remember the name Joe Clark? He was a high school principal, I think, in New Jersey, and
Yep.
He straightened out his school by carrying a baseball bat around the hallways. Well, I ran into Joe Clark. I used to run into people at airports a lot. I remember running into George McGovern some years ago, but I was sitting there talking to Joe Clark at an airport, and we were talking about some of the problems in this country, and he said, all right, he said, stop beating around the bush. He said, you can say it. He said, young black men in this country are out of control. And so, in other words, he was saying, don't be worried about being white and bringing this up. I'll bring it up for you. And he was absolutely on the mark. And the reason they are is because of this social welfare state we've created and its problems.
Exactly. It's just like the show The Blind Side was a perfect example of what happens. But you see, there's so much opportunity out here for them, and if they choose to do so. And throughout history, even when there were slaves, there were certain people up in the northern part of the countries that took advantage of the opportunities that the Constitution gave them, and they didn't sit there and cry in their soup. It's just...
Yeah, well...
Yeah.
I had a friend a coworker from Nigeria years ago, and he said the same thing. He said, look, I come from Africa. He said, I'm going to tell you right now. He said, black people in this country don't know what they're missing, what opportunities they could take, because he said, you certainly don't have them where I came from. You're up next, and you're on the air on Top Story at 9:27. What's on your mind?
Bill, I don't think it's just blacks. I mean, white people have trailer trash.
Yeah, sure.
Every race has their dole-out people that think that they're entitled. No. The guy that called against my deal and says he doesn't agree that the girl was totally responsible, there's part of the problem.
Well,
everyone has to take responsibility for themselves.
I thank you for the call. Look, I'm going to mention quickly, Pat Moynihan, when he was still alive, and I got to know him too as well when I was working as a reporter in radio and television in upstate New York. He had gotten in trouble in the 1960s for writing a report saying that black families were out of control, and he was called a racist. But he was going on about how the system, it wasn't them, the system had created this issue. But he also warned at the time it would spread to other groups, other people in the country. And sure enough, we saw a lot of unwed mothers in the black community, and then it spread to the Latino community. Now it is in the Caucasian community. So yes, and our last caller brings up a point. These systems, these programs, and the culture we've created, and then that culture leads to the art, the entertainment industry, and unfortunately, it celebrates a lot of this, or it maybe does so unintentionally, and that's how it is spread to the overall culture at large. It's like introducing a contagion, and you just can't keep it in one spot. It's going to spread throughout the country, and that's what we're dealing with. Hey, talking about ridiculous federal government decisions. George Will, syndicated columnist. I want to get to this in the next segment of the program. He's writing about something called the Raisin Administrative Committee. I kid you not. There is actually some sort of Orwellian organization within the United States government called the Raisin Administrative Committee, and it's looking to put some people, hardworking American farmers, out of business. Want to mention that. There's a court case coming up this week involving all of this. You'll be appalled when you hear what actually is going on. More details ahead. Bill Colley with you this morning. 50 at our studios. It's 9:30 on top story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as online anywhere around the world. You can listen live at newsradio1310.com. If you go to our website, newsradio1310.com, you will find a commentary that I posted this morning, and I call it The Raisin Police. And actually, if you go to our Facebook page, you can see it as well. We have a newsradio1310.com Facebook page, too, as well. And I posted this, and you may not know this, but yes, we do have raisin police in America. I kid you not. In fact, I'm linking to a larger point made by the columnist, syndicated columnist George Will, who was writing in the Washington Post over the weekend. His headline was "Shriveled Grapes, Shriveled Liberty." Now, there is a court case Wednesday. I think it's going to be argued before the Supreme Court of the United States. There happen to be some farmers who are being fined by the federal government. I'll tell you a little bit more about this. I'm jumping down middle of paragraph 2. In 1949, now this comes out of the New Deal. Remember your history. In the New Deal, President Roosevelt thought if you made certain products scarce, you would push the prices up because we were having deflationary issues during the Depression. So what they started doing is the government would go in and say, all right, we're going to take some of your product, and when we take that, that'll help push the price up. And these price supports, this unnatural system that was created, didn't really work. A number of reasons we came out of the Depression, none of which were the government sitting atop all of this food and waiting for it to rot and petrify. In 1949, so this is well after a decade after the program was first put into place, this regulatory itch, he writes, was institutionalized in the Raisin Administrative Committee, known by the acronym RAC. The Raisin Administrative Committee. Today it wants the Horn family, that's the family growing raisins that is currently under fire from the federal government. They're the ones taking their case to court to ante up about $700,000. They could instead have turned over more than 1 million pounds of raisins at least 4 years of their production. Now, they consider this to be their property. Perhaps the phrase public use is now elastic enough to encompass the seizure of raisins for the purpose of combating the depression that ended a while ago, he writes. Now, there's an old court case from 1940 called Wickard v. Filburn, where the farmer actually was participating in this government program and then decided he was going to start selling some of the product he'd grown on his own on the side. The government came in and seized his product. And then the court ruled in favor of the government, saying, well, he has an adhesion contract. He agreed to work with the government. But you realize from the standpoint of what we call justice, this is just ridiculous. So these people are growing raisins. They grow the grapes, and then they let them shrivel up into raisins. And the government wants to take some of those raisins to put them in storage somewhere, I guess until, as I say, they petrify, so that they can drive the price of raisins up as a price support for these grape growers around the country. These people say no. They want to be able to take all of their raisins and sell them. The government just can't do that. So this case is going to court this week, and we could finally have a decision. Even Elena Kagan, who is, I think, a Marxist-Leninist serving on this court, has questioned whether this is still a good idea, that the government be involved in this. This could finally start to break this type of governance down. Think about it, though. The Raisin Advisory or Administrative Committee, that is, how many thousands of these organizations are out there? Had you ever heard of the Raisin Administrative Committee before today? You think about that for a moment. How many thousands, if not tens of thousands, of these offices could be doing business, and we're paying the salaries of the people who work at them, and yet they're eating out your substance, to borrow a phrase from Thomas Jefferson. Then we're paying for their retirement benefits when they leave these offices. Also, they can harass us and intimidate us. I remember 15, 20 years ago reading a story, and it was about an office in Washington. And this is what my post is mainly about at our website, about an office in Washington that was charged with ferreting out Nazis in the United States. It had been created during World War II because we were worried about Nazi saboteurs working somewhere within this country, and we had to go find them. The war ended, and nobody noticed, but the office never closed. decades later, 50 years later, there were still people going to that office and they were going to work every day. There were no Nazis to find because World War II had come to an end. But since nobody had ever closed the office down, they didn't bother to go up to Congress and say, hey, we're not needed anymore, because they looked around and they said, wait a minute, think about this. We can all collect great big government salaries and big fat government retirement checks because nobody's come by to close our office down yet. And so this office continued for decades and decades and decades and decades. Maybe it's now been closed. I don't recall what the end game about all of this was. And I'm sure these guys were just going in there, taking long lunch hours, sleeping at their desks, sharpening pencils, and occasionally they were traveling out to the hinterlands to ensure there were no Nazis operating here. Pretty good gig if you can get it. Cost you as a taxpayer tens of billions of dollars over those decades. This is how our government is running. It is $18 trillion officially in debt. And as we said the other day, the unofficial numbers nationwide may amount to $131 trillion. These are the things we need to be talking about. Hunting Nazis, seizing raisins, and shrinking that debt. Not about whether a candidate is going to a gay wedding or not. I'll tell you what. I wouldn't want to be a member of the liberal media when it all hits the fan, because you're partly responsible too. 51, Bill Colley with you. More on this topic coming up in just a few minutes on Top Story on newsradio1310.com. I wanted to mention one more time, our good friends at Western States Bus Services, where they are hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. Pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services as an equal opportunity employer. Keep in mind they'll train you as well. On this subject of government intrusions into our lives, saw this in Washington Examiner. It's an editorial. 52 at our studios, 944. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. On News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com online, of course, which means you can listen to us anywhere all over the world. Do you realize that what they call civil asset forfeiture has become a big moneymaker for governments, local governments across the country? Even Eric Holder, the outgoing Attorney General, what's the old line that says a stop clock is right twice a day? Well, he basically has told the government to back off on this. In one of those rare moments where somebody that I detest actually did something that I'm pleased to say, good for him. There's a writer at the Washington Examiner, I believe Timothy Carney writes most of the editorials there. I go down to paragraph 4. As one police official in Missouri put it, the money is treated like pennies from heaven that the cops can use to buy, quote, toys, unquote, they would not otherwise be able to justify in their budgets. There is often little public accountability as to how the forfeited funds are spent. In one case, a department was accused of using the money to buy alcohol and even a margarita mixing machine. Again, I guess it's great work if you can find it. The writer says that's all funny, but the issue is not funny at all for thousands of Americans who find their property placed in limbo by more or less arbitrary government seizures. They find themselves in a strange universe where they are deprived of property more or less arbitrarily and forced to fight in order to win it back from the government. If that doesn't sound consistent with the spirit of the Constitution's guarantee of due process, it is because it really isn't. Now, we have this notion in this country of a presumption of innocence. And yet, in this particular case, when someone comes and grabs your property on an accusation, they're already making a presumption of guilt. And that's the problem. And then you have to go to court, fight for it, and it's going to cost you a fortune to do it. A lot of people are simply giving up in these situations. You can't blame them because this has become such an outright abuse of power by government that simply sees an opportunity that says, hey, you know what? We can pay for this if we go grab that. And if we don't stop this, it will get to the point where it will be so out of control, whenever a government has a budget shortfall, they'll just simply start appropriating property from enemies. It reminds you a bit of what takes place in China, where when you have a political enemy, you just simply condemn that person to death. That person is hacked open. That person's organs are removed, so some old codger on the Politburo can have a liver transplant, and then they toss away the body and do an incinerator of the corpse that's left over. And they just do it arbitrarily that way. Now, we're not talking maybe anything so heinous as you being put down on a table without anesthetic and hacked open. But if somebody came along tomorrow and just said, I see you got a new truck there. Well, we think that you've got some bad friends who are dealing in meth. I mean, we don't have any evidence that you've been doing it yet, but, we saw you driving around with them the other day, so the truck's ours. And tell you what, your house is ours, and your bank account is ours. All they're going to do is use these flimsy accusations to get away with all of this. This is a serious threat to your liberty, and it's got to be stopped. We've got to draw a line. The notion of it was, remember back in the late 1980s when we had that serious crack epidemic in this country? Not so much maybe in Idaho or Utah or Nevada, but we had a crack epidemic. Yeah, academic. I'll get it right there one of these moments. Epidemic. We had a crack epidemic, and people said we got to stop it, and we started instituting all of these draconian laws in order to do it. Why? Because politicians won re-election when they said, I'll get tough on crime. I'll show them the what for. So we all went out and we voted for them. RICO statutes. RICO statutes were put in place to handle drug dealers, but I've seen them now expanded, and they're using them against people who protest outside of abortion clinics. They're being used outside of... A friend of mine, I hate to admit this, was an illegal bookmaker. He wasn't a bad guy otherwise. He owned a bar, and he ran book out of the back of it. And I asked him one day, why did you close the bar down? He said, because the government came along and threatened me with the RICO statutes. They couldn't get much else in the way of other evidence against him because most of the people who were coming in drinking at his bar happened to be working for the local district attorney's office or police departments or, they have those habits too. But the fact of the matter is, here was a guy otherwise doing something the government already does, sells lottery tickets, doesn't it? He was doing this, and they said, we're going to use this, racketeering statute against you if you continue to do what you're doing, and you'll spend the rest of your natural life in a federal prison. He said, sorry, I'm going to close the place up. And he did, and he walked away from it. Mike Huckabee is coming up next. I'm not necessarily endorsing what he did. I'm just telling you what happened, that statute was never designed to chase down Americans otherwise, but these laws just get expanded and used that way because they can. 52 at our studios, the Huckabee Report, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. And here we go, Governor Huckabee. And thank you very much. Governor Huckabee is expected, he's hinting his announcement that he is running for president will be on May 5th. So at that point, that'll pretty much be it for Huckabee. We'll have to change the name of the report. And maybe, as I said the other day, it'll be Fred Thompson once again. I always enjoy hearing his voice. 9:54, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 52 at our studios. If you'd like to reach the program today, and I guess we've jumped around a lot, I'll admit that. On Monday mornings, there's just so much to cover, you can't get to all of it. 736-0300 if you'd like to reach me, 736-0300. Also, my email address is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. That is bill.colley, last name spelled Colley, at townsquaremedia.com. We were talking with Randy Staples in the last hour from the Idaho Weekly Briefing about an effort between the four northwestern states and Western Canada to have the president sign a treaty, and they've got support from both Democrats and Republicans, to better use the water resources from the Columbia River and its watershed to ensure that we don't end up with some of the problems that we have in places like California. Did you know that in Canada as well, there is discussion going on about an oil pipeline, and it's not the one that you're aware of? Of course, we've had the debate in this country over the Keystone XL pipeline. The president has put that on hold. If we elect a Republican in 2016, we will have construction starting on that pipeline in 2017. But in the meantime, the Canadians decided that they were going to build a pipeline to the West Coast because if they can't sell all of that oil to us, they would like to sell some of it to the Chinese and the Japanese and people around Asia. There is an Indian tribe, is that still politically correct? Indigenous people tribe that has set up shop in British Columbia, that is now trying to block construction of the pipeline. The tribe says it will impact their lands and could cause some serious problems with their local environment. The Wall Street Journal actually has a story about it today, and in the cover photo, there is a picture from the reservation, and there is an old Dodge pickup truck. I'm going to say it's probably a 77 or 78 Dodge pickup, and it is sitting, the back end of it, on blocks. There's still tires on the front end of it. There are some tree stumps that have been hacked down, not quite yet cut into firewood, that are all about around it. And there's an old television aerial that was apparently sitting beside it, which is now tipped over and is now draped over the roof of the pickup truck. And this pickup truck is sitting out in a field, and it is rotting away and sitting next to a lake, we should point out, too. So all of the old fluids in it, oil and transmission fluid and the like, and whatever rust runs off it will be going directly into the water. These people are claiming the pipeline, if it ran by their reservation, would disturb the environment. And yet, if this picture is indicative of what that reservation is actually like, with junk automobiles left and right, then I think these people are just plainly blowing smoke as usual. I think they need a website. Now, in Canada, they don't do .com, they do .ca. But perhaps we could call it saveourcraphole.ca. Clean that up a little bit. And it seems to me a lot of times the arguments that people are making about these environmental issues are just to be a thorn in the side of whatever progress we could have. And I think in this particular case, it's just because, once more, they can do it. So therefore, they're doing it. Coming up on 10 o'clock, Rush Limbaugh will be along following Fox News. Following the news at 1 o'clock from Fox, Sean Hannity. Following the news at 4 o'clock this afternoon from Fox as well, we'll have Glenn Beck. And then, of course, Dave Ramsey this evening. Bill Colley with you this morning. I want to thank you for joining me on this Monday. 52 at our studios, coming up on 8:59. And God willing, and the creek don't rise, we get to do all of this all over again tomorrow morning. In fact, maybe we can hear from my buddy out there with his 600,000 followers. Yeah, if they're out there, then apparently there are a lot of other delusional people too as well. Have a great day, everybody.